I smoothed down my simple blue dress as I walked into the Grand Plaza Hotel, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. Today was my daughter Clara's wedding day, and despite everything, I couldn't help but smile. The lobby, gleaming with marble and crystal, was exactly the kind of venue the Millers would choose. "Mom!" Clara's voice rang out across the lobby. I turned to see her, still in her regular clothes, hurrying towards me. "You made it!" But there was something tight about her smile, a tension in her shoulders that I recognized all too well. "Of course I made it, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss your big day for the world." I reached out to hug her, but she took a small step back, her eyes darting around the lobby. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she began, wringing her hands. "Henry's family. They've made some changes to the seating arrangements." My stomach tightened. I'd been expecting something like this ever since Henry's mother, Eleanor Miller, had taken over the wedding planning. "What kind of changes?" "They've moved you to the back table," she said quickly, the words tumbling out. "Near the kitchen entrance. Eleanor says it's because of the photographer's setup, but—" She trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. Before I could respond, a sharp voice cut through our conversation. "Clara, what are you doing down here? We need you in the bridal suite immediately." Eleanor Miller strode across the lobby, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Her eyes swept over me with barely concealed disdain. "Oh, you're here." I straightened my spine. "Hello, Eleanor. The hotel looks lovely." Her lips curved into a cold smile. "Yes, well, we wanted everything to be perfect for Henry and Clara. Speaking of which," she turned to Clara. "Darling, your hair appointment was scheduled for 10 minutes ago. You don't want to keep everyone waiting." Clara hesitated, looking between her mother and her future mother-in-law. "Go on," I said gently. "It's your day. Don't worry about me." As Clara hurried away, Eleanor's facade dropped. "Listen," she said, her voice low and cutting. "I know Clara insisted on having you here, but let's be clear. You don't fit in with our crowd. The Millers have a certain reputation to maintain." I kept my voice steady. "I'm here for my daughter." "Yes, and you can support her from the back of the room. We don't need your modest circumstances ruining the wedding photos. I'm sure you understand." Her smile was sharp as glass. "Oh, and we've arranged for the staff meals to be served at your table. It seemed appropriate." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the vast lobby. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of the humiliation. I thought about the extra shifts I'd picked up at the hospital, working as a nurse to help pay for Clara's education. I thought about the nights I'd spent helping her study for her medical school entrance exams, proud beyond words when she'd been accepted. Now, my daughter was marrying into the Miller family, owners of the largest hospital network in the state, and suddenly, my decades of hard work meant nothing. I found my way to the ballroom where the wedding would take place in a few hours. The space was stunning. Crystal chandeliers caught the light, fresh flowers adorned every table, and a string quartet was setting up in the corner. But as I walked toward the back of the room, I saw it, my table, partially hidden behind a large pillar, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. "Mrs. Martinez?" A young woman in a hotel staff uniform approached me. "I'm Jenny from Event Services. We were told you'd be seated here." I nodded, noticing the sympathy in her eyes. "That's right." "The thing is," Jenny lowered her voice, glancing around, "I wanted to let you know, well, the staff here, we all know who you are. My sister was at County General last year when you worked that terrible 30-hour shift during the crisis. You saved her life." I blinked in surprise. I remembered that night, a massive pileup on the highway had overwhelmed the hospital. I'd stayed long past my shift, working until I could barely stand. Jenny continued, "We think it's wrong how they're treating you, and we wanted you to know. If you need anything, just ask. The whole staff is on your side." For a moment, I stood there processing Jenny's words. Then I remembered something that could change everything. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. "Actually," I said, a small smile playing at my lips, There is something you could help me with, but first, I need to make a call. As I dialed a familiar number, I watched the Miller family sweeping through the ballroom, directing staff and making demands. Eleanor was at the center of it all, gesturing dramatically about some perceived flaw in the table settings. "Hello, Michael. It's Sarah Martinez. Remember that favor you wanted? I think it's time to cash it in." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. I watched from my corner as the ballroom filled with guests, all dressed in designer clothes and dripping with jewelry. I couldn't help but notice how the Millers greeted each arrival with elaborate embraces and air kisses, at least until they spotted me. "Is that her?" I overheard one woman whisper to Eleanor. "The mother who works as a nurse?" Eleanor's response was just loud enough to carry. "Yes, unfortunately. But don't worry, we've managed to keep her out of sight. Can't have anything spoiling Henry's big day." I checked my watch. Any minute now. The first sign that something was wrong came when Jenny and 3 other servers subtly removed their uniforms, revealing street clothes underneath. They walked straight through the middle of the ballroom and toward the exit. "Where are you going?" Eleanor called out, her voice sharp. "We haven't even served the appetizers." Jenny turned, her head held high. "We quit." Before Eleanor could respond, more staff members began following suit. The bartenders packed up their tools, the valet parking attendants walked off their posts, even the wedding coordinator closed her laptop and headed for the door. "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "You can't just leave. We have a contract." "Actually," a deep voice said from the doorway, "they can." Michael Chen, CEO of the hotel chain, walked into the ballroom. His presence commanded immediate attention, and I had to suppress a smile as I watched Eleanor's expression shift from anger to confusion to desperate charm. "Mr. Chen," Eleanor hurried forward, "there must be some mistake. We booked this venue months ago, and now your staff is following my direct orders?" Michael finished for her. He turned to address the crowded room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but the Grand Plaza will not be able to host this event today. All staff have been instructed to cease operations immediately." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests began murmuring. Henry's father was shouting about lawyers, and Poor Clara looked like she might faint. "Mom?" She made her way through the crowd to my side. "What's happening?" Before I could answer, Michael spotted me and smiled warmly. "Sarah, there you are." Eleanor's head whipped around so fast I worried she might hurt herself. You know each other?" "Know each other?" Michael laughed. "Sarah Martinez saved my daughter's life last year. Spotted a rare condition that every other doctor had missed. Stayed with her through the night, monitoring her personally." He turned to me. "I told you then, anything you need, anytime. I meant it." The pieces were starting to fall into place for the guests. I could see the dawning horror on Eleanor's face as she realized her mistake. "But more than that," Michael continued, his voice carrying across the now silent room, "Sarah Martinez sits on the board of directors for our hospital group's charitable foundation. She's been instrumental in directing millions in funding to underprivileged communities. When she called to tell me how she was being treated at her own daughter's wedding," he shook his head. "Well, let's just say the Grand Plaza doesn't associate with that kind of behavior." Clara stared at me, tears in her eyes. "Mom, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever say anything?" I squeezed her hand. "Because I wanted you to make your own way, sweetheart. I never wanted my connections to influence your choices." I paused, looking around the room. "But I also won't let anyone treat us like we're beneath them." "This is ridiculous," Eleanor's voice was shrill. "You can't just shut down our wedding. Do you know how much we spent?" "Oh, I'm not shutting it down," I said calmly. I nodded to Michael, who gestured to the staff waiting by the doors. They began wheeling in new serving carts, and fresh ranks of waiters entered the ballroom. "I'm taking over." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as I continued. "The wedding will proceed if Clara and Henry still want it to, but under new management and new seating arrangements." Henry, who had been watching everything unfold in stunned silence, finally stepped forward. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm so sorry. I had no idea my parents were treating you this way." He turned to Clara, "And I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you and your mom sooner." Clara looked between her fiancé and her mother, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm sorry too. I should have said something." "No more apologies," I said firmly. "This is still your day. Let's make it a good one." I turned to the gathered guests. "Everyone who would like to stay and celebrate Clara and Henry's wedding is welcome, as long as they understand that in this room, everyone is equal, everyone is family." The transformation that followed was remarkable. The Miller family, thoroughly humbled, retreated to quiet corners. The other guests, free from the atmosphere of judgment and pretense, began to relax. And Clara was glowing with pride as she looked at me. As the ceremony began, slightly delayed but more genuine than it would have been, I took my seat in the front row. Jenny, who had changed back into her uniform along with the other staff, caught my eye and winked. I smiled, thinking about how different this day had turned out from what I'd expected. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't about getting even, it was about standing up and showing your true worth. But there was still one more surprise in store for everyone. As the reception began, I watched the transformed atmosphere with quiet satisfaction. The string quartet played softly in the background, while guests mingled freely, the former social hierarchy forgotten in the wake of the afternoon's revelations. Eleanor Miller sat at a table near the kitchen doors, the very one she'd assigned to me, looking thoroughly deflated. Her husband, Richard, kept checking his phone, no doubt trying to assess the social damage of the day's events. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "Mrs. Martinez?" Henry approached my table looking nervous but determined. "Could we talk privately for a moment?" I nodded, following my new son-in-law to a quiet corner of the ballroom. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I want you to know," he began, "that I've made some decisions. I'm stepping away from my family's hospital administration position." My eyebrows rose in surprise. "Henry, that's not necessary." "It is," he insisted. "I've been thinking about this for a while, actually. I went into healthcare administration because it was expected, but—" He straightened his shoulders. "I want to go to medical school, like Clara. I want to help people directly, the way you do." A warm smile spread across my face. "Clara never told me that." "I never told her," Henry admitted. "I was afraid of disappointing my parents. But after seeing you today, how you handled everything with such grace and strength, I realized I've been living my life trying to please the wrong people." Before I could respond, Michael Chen appeared at my elbow. "Sarah, there's someone here who'd like to speak with you." He gestured toward the ballroom entrance, where an elegant older woman stood waiting. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized Dr. Catherine Reynolds, the current health commissioner for the state. "Sarah Martinez, Doctor," Reynolds said warmly, approaching our group. "I'm so glad I could make it, even if I am fashionably late." Eleanor and Richard, who had been watching from their table, practically tripped over themselves rushing over. "Commissioner Reynolds," Eleanor gushed. "What an unexpected honor." "Save it, Eleanor," the commissioner cut her off coolly. "I'm here to speak with Sarah." She turned back to me with a smile. "The board meeting is next week, and I wanted to discuss this in person. We've reviewed your proposal for the new community health initiative, and, well, we're not just approving it, we're doubling the funding." The Millers' jaws dropped in perfect synchronization. "But more than that, Doctor," Reynolds continued, "I'm retiring next year, and the governor has been asking for recommendations for my replacement." She gave me a meaningful look. "I'd like to put your name forward, if you're interested." The ballroom had gone quiet again, everyone straining to hear the conversation. I felt Clara's hand slip into mine. I hadn't even noticed her approaching. "Mom," she whispered, "you never told me about any of this." I squeezed her hand. "I've always believed that our work should speak for itself. All those nights, I wasn't just working extra shifts." I was also building relationships, creating programs, finding ways to help more people. I never needed the recognition. I just wanted to make a difference. And that, Dr. Reynolds said firmly, is exactly why you're perfect for the position. Eleanor looked like she might faint. But she's just a nurse. Just a nurse? Dr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Miss Miller, just a nurse. Sarah Martinez has done more for healthcare in this state than your entire family's hospital network. While you were planning galas and worrying about social status, she was actually saving lives and changing the system from within. Henry stepped forward. Commissioner Reynolds, I'd actually love to hear more about that community health initiative. I'm planning to apply to medical school. Medical school? Eleanor interrupted, her voice shrill. But you're supposed to take over the family business. No, Mother, Henry said firmly. I'm going to make my own way, just like Clara did, just like Mrs. Martinez taught her to do. The reception continued into the evening, but with a distinctly different tone than anyone had expected. The Millers retreated to their table, their social cards thoroughly played. Meanwhile, I found myself surrounded by guests eager to discuss my work and vision for the future of healthcare in our state. As I watched Clara and Henry share their first dance, I reflected on how differently this day had turned out from what I feared. I hadn't set out to humiliate the Millers or prove my worth. I'd simply refused to be diminished by their prejudice. Jenny appeared at my side with a glass of champagne. You know, the young server said with a grin, when my sister told me about the nurse who saved her life, she said you were some kind of angel. I think you might actually be a ninja. I laughed, accepting the champagne. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about standing tall and letting your actions speak for themselves. Later that night, as the reception was winding down, Clara found me alone on the hotel's terrace, looking out at the city lights. Mom, her voice was soft. I'm so sorry about everything. Not just today, but I've been pulling away from you, trying to fit into Henry's world. I forgot who I am, who you taught me to be. I turned to my daughter, seeing not the bride in her expensive gown, but the little girl who used to fall asleep reading medical textbooks because she wanted to be just like her mom. You never have to apologize for trying to find your way, I said, pulling her into a hug. But remember, your value isn't in who you marry or what family you join. It's in what you do, how you treat people, and the difference you make in the world. Clara wiped away a tear, careful of her makeup. I know that now, more than ever. She paused, then added with a small smile. Health Commissioner Martinez? I laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why not? After today, I'd say anything is possible. As we stood there, mother and daughter, looking out at the city together, I felt a deep sense of peace. The Millers had tried to put me in my place, not realizing that I had built my own place, one of respect, dignity, and real accomplishment. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. The staff can't stop talking about yesterday. You've become a legend at the Grand Plaza. I smiled as I typed my reply. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living your truth and letting others learn from it. As I set my phone down, I thought about all the paths that had led to this moment. Years of hard work, quiet dedication, and unwavering integrity had built a foundation that no amount of social snobbery could shake. The Millers had seen me as just a nurse, not realizing that every life I touched, every program I built, every relationship I forged, had created a legacy far more valuable than their superficial status. In the end, I hadn't needed to destroy them. I'd simply needed to stand in my own light and let the truth illuminate everything else. And as I prepared for another day at the hospital, commissioner's nomination or not, I still had patients who needed me. I smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong, but in proving yourself right. Story 2. I never imagined my wedding day would be the beginning of my greatest nightmare. The moment I walked down the aisle, glowing in my carefully chosen white gown, I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as I soon learned, are only stories. Reality is far more cruel. My husband, Ethan, had always been charming. His smile could light up a room, and his words carried a warmth that made you feel like you were the center of the universe. That's what drew me to him in the first place. But standing there at the altar, I couldn't shake the icy glances from his mother, Vivian, and his older sister, Lila. They sat in the front row, whispering to each other as if sharing some inside joke. My stomach twisted. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. The reception was lavish. Vivian's doing, of course. She loved to flaunt her wealth and influence. As I greeted the guests, I noticed how Vivian's friends looked me up and down. Their smiles polite, but their eyes sharp, assessing. "She's lovely," one woman said to Vivian, loud enough for me to hear. "But she's simple, isn't she?" Deviant response was a laugh that sent shivers down my spine. Indeed. Well, not everyone can be extraordinary. I clenched my fists, determined to ignore the stain. This was my wedding day. I refused to let her ruin it. But the real blow came later that night during the first dance. Ethan's family had gathered around, clapping and cheering, but their smiles were laced with mockery as Ethan twirled me under the lights. I overheard Layla whisper to a cousin, "She doesn't belong here. She's out of her depth." The words pierced me like a knife. My dream day was unraveling when Ethan and I finally escaped to our hotel suite. I confronted him. "Your family? They don't like me, do they?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't let them get to you, Kate. They're just protective. Protective. They were mocking me. Ethan. Right there in front of everyone." He kissed my forehead, his tone dismissive. "You're overthinking it. Let's just enjoy tonight." But I couldn't enjoy it. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they would only grow in the weeks to come. Married life with Ethan was a mix of bliss and bitterness. He was sweet when we were alone. But when his family was around, he transformed into someone else entirely. Didion's subtle jabs became a daily occurrence, always wrapped in a guise of concern. "Kate, dear," she said one evening during a family dinner, "have you thought about taking etiquette classes? It's just, well, our circles can be quite demanding and I wouldn't want you to feel out of place." Layla smirked over her glass of wine. "Oh, mother, don't overwhelm her. She's doing her best after all." I looked to Ethan for support, but he only gave me a strained smile, his eyes darting away. The breaking point came during a charity gala. Devin had insisted I attend even though I felt like a fish out of water. Among the glittering gowns and polished smiles as I stood awkwardly by the bar, I overheard Vivian speaking to a group of donors. "She's sweet," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But honestly, I expected Ethan to choose someone more refined. Laughter erupted from the group and my face burned with humiliation. When I confronted Ethan that night, his response was infuriating. "They don't mean anything by it," he said, brushing off my tears. "You're taking it too personally. Despite everything, I tried to fit in. I took Vivian's advice attending etiquette classes and investing in designer clothes, hoping to earn their approval, but nothing was ever enough. Every effort I made was met with more criticism. One evening, as I sat alone in our apartment staring at a photo from our honeymoon, something inside me snapped. Why was I bending over backward? For people who clearly despised me? Why wasn't Ethan standing up for me? I realized then that I couldn't keep living like this. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. From that moment of realization, my resolve hardened. I wasn't going to let Vivian, Layla, or anyone else in Ethan's family dictate how I lived my life or how I felt about myself. If they wanted me to fail, I would give them the fight of their lives. But I quickly learned that standing up to them would come with devastating consequences. My first act of defiance was at a family brunch Vivian hosted at her sprawling estate. The theme was old Hollywood glamour, and I arrived dressed to the nines in a sleek black gown with vintage pearls, channeling Audrey Hepburn. When I walked through the door, all heads turned, and for a moment I thought I'd want a small victory. Vivian's smile was tight. "Oh, Kate, you made it. I wasn't sure you'd understand the theme." I returned her smile equally. "I see I never miss an opportunity to shine." Layla snorted into her mimosa, but I ignored her. As the brunch progressed, I held my ground, participating in conversations with poise and confidence. I could see their discomfort, Vivian's forced laughter, Lila's exaggerated eye rolls. But I felt empowered for the first time, until, of course, they retaliated. After the meal, Vivian pulled me aside, her tone sweet, but her words venomous. "I know you're trying, dear, but perhaps it's best to let the more seasoned women handle the social dynamics. You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself, were Ethan." Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. "Thank you for the advice, Vivian," I said, my voice steady, "but I think I'll manage just fine." The conflict with Vivian and Layla wasn't just between us, it seeped into my marriage. Ethan hated confrontation, and instead of supporting me, he retreated into silence. One night, after another heated dinner with his family, I confronted him. "Why won't you say anything to them?" I demanded, pacing our living room. "They humiliate me, Ethan. In front of you. In front of everyone. And you just sit there." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "What do you want me to do, Kate? They're my family. And what am I?" I shot back, my voice cracking. "Am I not your family, too?" His silence was deafening. It became clear that I was on my own. Things escalated at Ethan's company gala, an event I had been dreading but couldn't avoid. Vivian and Layla were, of course, in attendance, along with the elite of the business world. I had meticulously prepared, wearing an elegant emerald gown and practicing conversation starters to hold my own for most of the evening. I managed to avoid them, but as I stood by the buffet chatting with one of Ethan's colleagues, I heard a familiar voice. "She's charming, isn't she?" Vivian's tone was syrupy sweet, but her words were daggers. "It's just a shame she doesn't quite understand our world. Poor thing." "She's trying so hard." Layla chimed in, her laughter sharp. "It's like watching a child play dress-up." My heart sank as I realized they were talking about me. Worse, the colleague I was speaking to excused himself awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the spectacle Vivian and Layla were making. I couldn't take it anymore. Turning on my heel, I marched straight to their table. "Is there something you'd like to say to me directly?" I demanded, my voice trembling, but firm. There was silence in the room. Vivian looked up at me with feigned surprise. "Kate, dear, what are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my hands clenched. "You've been undermining me since the day I married Ethan. I'm done pretending it doesn't bother me." Layla smirked. "Oh, sweetie, don't take things so personally. It's all in good fun." "Fun," I echoed, my voice rising. "Tearing someone down for your own amusement is fun to you." Before they could respond, I turned to Ethan, who had been standing frozen by the bar. "And you?" I said, my voice breaking. "Are you really going to just stand there and let this happen?" He looked at me helplessly, his silence cutting deeper than any insult Vivian or Layla could throw, humiliated and furious. I left the gala, ignoring Ethan's weak protests as I stormed out. The weeks that followed were a blur of arguments and cold shoulders. Ethan tried to apologize, but his words felt hollow. The rift between us widened with each passing day. One evening, as I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, a headline caught my eye. "Family feud at high society gala. Daughter-in-law causes scene." My heart sank as I read the article, complete with quotes from anonymous attendees, describing me as overly emotional and out of place. It didn't take a genius to figure out who had leaked the story. Furious, I confronted Ethan. "Your family has crossed a line," I said, shoving the article in his face. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" He looked at the article and sighed. "Kate, you shouldn't have confronted them like that. You know how they are." I stared at him, incredulous. "You're blaming me. They humiliated me," Ethan said publicly, "and now they're spreading lies about me to the media. I'll talk to them," he said weakly, but I knew he wouldn't. For the first time, I started to wonder if I had made a mistake marrying him. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, an unexpected lifeline appeared in the form of Ethan's younger brother, Adam. Unlike the rest of the family, Adam had always been kind to me, but he mostly kept to himself, avoiding the drama that surrounded Vivian and Layla. One afternoon, he called me out of the blue. "I heard about the gala," he said, his voice sympathetic. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how they treated you. It's not right." His words brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," Adam. That means more than you know. You don't deserve this, Kate, he continued. And you're not alone. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. In the weeks that followed, Adam's words lingered in my mind. I had been so consumed by Vivian and Layla's hostility, by Ethan's passivity, that I hadn't considered I might have allies, even within their family. That small spark of hope was enough to keep me going, though I wasn't sure where it would lead. It started with a conversation I didn't realize I needed. Adam invited me for coffee, a rare gesture that I accepted with hesitation. We met at a cozy cafe on the edge of town, far removed from the world of high society luncheons and gala drama. I don't get it, I admitted, after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Why are you sticking your neck out for me? You're Vivian's son, too. Adam stirred his coffee thoughtfully. You're right, I am. But I'm also tired of seeing her treat people like pawns in her game. You're not the first person she's tried to tear down, but you're the first one who stood up to her. His words both comforted and unsettled me. I don't feel like I'm standing up to her most days. It feels like I'm barely holding on. That's because you're fighting alone, he said simply. You shouldn't have to. Adam's support emboldened me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Together, we began to strategize ways to reclaim my dignity and stand up to Vivian and Layla. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about drawing boundaries and demanding respect. You can't play their game, Adam advised during one of our many conversations. They'll always have the upper hand, but you can change the rules. Hell? I asked, skeptical but intrigued by showing them they can't control you. Start by building your own network, your own reputation. Show them and Ethan that you don't need their approval. It was a daunting idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had been so focused on fitting into their world that I had lost sight of my own strengths. It was time to change that. The first step was reconnecting with who I was before I met Ethan. I dusted off my old portfolio and began freelancing as a graphic designer, a career I had put on hold after our wedding. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my confidence, landing a few small but meaningful clients. Vivian and Layla, of course, caught wind of my efforts and wasted no time belittling them. Oh, how quaint, Layla remarked at a dinner party. A little hobby to keep you busy. I smiled sweetly, refusing to take the bait. Actually, it's a full-time career and it's going quite well. Thank you. Their barbs didn't sting as much anymore. I was learning to see them. For what? They were insecure, manipulative women who thrived on making others feel small. But the real turning point came during yet another family gathering, a charity event Vivian was hosting at her estate. Adam had encouraged me to attend, not to prove anything to them, but to myself. The evening started, predictably enough, with Vivian and Layla playing their usual games of thinly veiled insults and backhanded compliments. But things escalated when Vivian, in a theatrical show of generosity, announced a sizable donation to the charity on behalf of the entire family. She then turned to me with a saccharine smile. Kate, dear, would you like to say a few words on behalf of Ethan and yourself? It was a trap and I knew it. If I declined, I'd look. I'm grateful. If I accepted, I'd be stepping into her spotlight. However, I was prepared this time. I took the microphone, my heart pounding but my voice steady. Thank you, Vivian, for your generous donation, I began. It's truly inspiring to see such support for a cause so close to my heart. I paused, meeting her gaze. In fact, Ethan and I have also made a contribution, one that reflects our personal values and priorities. Because at the end of the day, what truly matters is not only the magnitude of the contribution, but the sincerity behind it. The crowd exploded in polite applause, but the look on Vivian's face was priceless. For the first time, I had outmaneuvered her on her own field. After the occasion, Ethan grabbed me aside, his expression inscrutable. Where did that originate from? He inquired. Not unkindly. What do you mean? I answered, pretending innocence. You were so composed, confident. It's not like you. I bristled at his statements, but decided to find the silver lining. Maybe it's who I've always been. Ethan, you just haven't noticed. To my amazement, he didn't protest. Instead, he appeared contemplative, almost introspective. I felt as though he was actually seeing me for the first time in months. I refused to allow Vivian and Layla's antics dominate me in the days after the incident, instead choosing to concentrate on my career and personal development. Adam continued to be a reliable ally, providing support and guidance when I most needed it. The actual turning point, however, was when Ethan faced his mother. One evening, he informed me, "I had been thinking about what you said at the event. You're correct too. I've given them too much power, too much control over us. That's over now." I felt as though a burden had been lifted when I heard those words. We felt like we were on the same team for the first time. It took time for Vivian and Layla to change. Over sure, but they started to feel as though they were losing control over Ethan and me. Ethan began to defend me in little but significant ways once I stopped participating in their drama. Though not a flawless answer, it was a step in the right direction. And I felt optimistic about the future for the first time in a long time. Vivian's hold on things was difficult to break. As expected, she made a final effort to regain control. Under the pretense of celebrating Ethan's financial success, she planned an extravagant gala, which she used to demonstrate her power over her family. As the evening went on, it became evident that I was the main character in her unsaid story. She subtly made fun of my upbringing, my job, and even our marriage. Ever the devoted soldier to her mother, Layla did the same. However, I didn't break down this time. Calm but forceful, I answered. "I have to give it to you, Vivian. You're skilled at drawing attention to yourself. However, I believe it's time for everyone to stop acting as though there is just one path." There was silence in the room. The crowd felt the weight of what I had spoken. Didion's eyes narrowed, and she briefly lost her composure before regaining it with a fragile grin. She said in a tone that I could see, "I only want what's best for my son." "I also do, but it's better for him and for us to create a life on our terms, not yours," I added. Ethan surprised and relieved me by coming forward and placing a soft touch on my shoulder. "Kate's right," he responded steadily. "I need to stop allowing you to control our life. Mom, I love you, but we need space to work on the project we're working on together." Vivian appeared as if she had been hit. She had used her power without challenge for years, but suddenly her son, whom she had always relied on, was expressing disapproval. Everyone in the room sensed a change in the balance of power at that very moment. Although the changes in life were gradual, they were noticeable. Even if they were still strong, Vivian and Layla could no longer control us. Even though they periodically pushed limits, Ethan and I remained strong and put up a unified front. As I took on more challenging tasks and discovered a helpful network of mentors and colleagues, my career took off. Motivated by my self-reliance, Ethan began looking for methods to overcome his mother's influence in his own career. Our bond also became stronger. We improved our communication skills and learned to support one another instead of retreating when times were difficult. Our shared struggles served as the cornerstone for something stronger and more profound. Adam continued to be a reliable confidant, providing insight and humor when we most needed it. He even softened Vivian's jagged edges over time, bridging the distance between us. "She will never acknowledge it." "She respects you," Adam told me once. "No one else has ever confronted her like you did." It was hardly the type of triumph I had hoped for. No grandiose apologies or abrupt changes occurred, but I had seen that real strength did not come from making other people change. It resulted from remaining loyal to who I am, in spite of criticism. Ethan and I had renovated together one afternoon while I was working on a new design project at the home office. I stopped to absorb it all, the sound of Ethan laughing while playing with our dog in the adjacent room, and the sunlight coming in through the windows. The tranquil calm of knowing that I was in the right place. It had been a convoluted, agonizing, and often overwhelming trip. It had been worthwhile, though. I had discovered my mission, my voice, and a love that was more resilient than the hardships it had faced. I was no longer merely getting by. I was doing well. Story 3. This is where my journey starts. My name is Ellie. Moving from foster family to foster home while growing up in a tiny town, I eventually found a home with the Thompsons. I had longed for stability my entire life, and they delivered it to me as a priceless gift. Before I went out to college and became the first person in my foster family to live in a major city, my life was rather ordinary. I threw myself into learning languages, concentrating on Japanese. I finally got a job as a translator at an international trade organization after a lot of hard work. An enormous accomplishment for a girl from a little place like myself. I got my customary black coffee on a typical Tuesday as I entered a little cafe close to my workplace. I saw him at that point. Jack, tall, and able to light up a room with his smile. Despite his business-like demeanor, he appeared at ease while using his phone. I sensed an unmistakable connection as our eyes locked. "The first time I've seen you here? Hello." As I sat down and drank my coffee, I tried to sound informal. He raised his head. His grin grew, attempting to get away from the pandemonium at the office. "My name is Jack." He held out his hand and said. A spark appeared as I shook it. "My name is Allie. What attracts me to my favorite location? Mr. Escape the office." Intrigued, I asked, but he joked. "Coffee and better company, apparently." And we clicked right away after that. Weeks passed. Weeks turned into months, and a year had gone by before we realized it. We were no longer just having coffee chats. Jack was a lovely, cosmopolitan city man. However, we were both aware that things weren't always easy. I was ecstatic when we decided to be married after a year of dating. The Thompsons are the ones that helped to mold me into the person I am now, and I wanted him to meet them. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, my foster parents, were down-to-earth individuals who worked hard and had simple lives. They rented a small, unremarkable apartment that was warm and loving since they had been renovating their home. I told Jack that even if it's not much, it's full of pleasant memories. He nodded, but I saw the expression in his eyes as he looked about the little room. He was obviously uneasy. My parents treated him like a king or queen when we were there for the weekend. Jack, however, was good-natured and constantly looked at his watch. I want to get back to the city. That Sunday night, the stillness in the van felt oppressive as we made our way home. "You've been silent, Jack. What is going on?" At last, I inquired. He let out a sigh, scarcely hesitated to speak. "We're from different worlds, Allie, but your parents are good." His words were boiling. I struggled to remain calm. "What does that signify?" Simply said, "It's different. This uncomplicated existence is not something I'm used to." In an attempt to get things forward swiftly, he confessed. I bit my lip as I looked out the window and thought about how our lives were different. "I don't really care about stuff, Jack, but we must respect one another's backgrounds." I spoke aggressively. He gave a nod. "Correct, naturally. Allie, you are loved. That's what counts," he remarked, although it seemed like he wasn't sure we really understood one another. I woke up that night, thinking about the straightforward existence I value and the complex world I was entering. It was my time to meet Jack's side of the family, just a few days after our unpleasant visit to my childhood home. His mother, Vivian, lived in a high-rise apartment in the heart of the city that was opulently decorated and exuded affluence. When we got there, she was waiting for us at the door, completely decked out in expensive clothing, and her flat looked like it belonged in a magazine. "Isn't it, Allie?" "What do you do, too?" Vivian questioned, assessing me as though I were a potential purchase. "I work as a translator. At a trade company, I deal with Japanese clients," I answered, attempting to seem assured. She partly smiled and murmured, "Oh, impressive," but her eyes were searching me for weaknesses. "What?" I talked about my foster parents and my history. Her face changed from provincial to essay-inspired. "My Jack doesn't appear to meet that description." Jack jumped right in. "Please, Mom, I adore Allie, who is amazing. We're getting married." "Are you married? What time is this taking place? What plans do you have?" Vivian became a little too intrusive in her tone. "We have a tiny private idea in mind. Only us in Hawaii." In an attempt to emphasize the romanticism, I said. Her eyes almost swelled. "Hawaii? Only the two of you? That won't work. If I can't, what will my friends think? Even a formal wedding for my only son?" "Calm," I tried to say. "Vivian, it's our day. Without all the fuss, we just want something that feels authentic to us. It was the decisive moment. With a sigh, she announced that the conversation was over, leaving the room. Jack gave me a quick look, his face contrite and hushed. Let me speak with her. We'll resolve this. Despite the difficult beginning, 4 months passed quickly, and we were in Hawaii, prepared to say, I do. Jack and I were to be the only guests at the private ceremony. Naturally, however, Vivian had other ideas. She arrived with a camera in hand, ready to record every second. She seemed to be lurking to make sure she had a lot of content to share online. As he reveled in the sunshine and the happiness of the ceremony, Jack appeared unaware. I made an effort to smile, leaning toward a whisper. I assumed we would be alone. He squeezed my hand. Am I being sincere? I apologize. I understand. She's simply thrilled. Let's try to make her day enjoyable. Vivian was constantly on her phone, yelling "Smile here" as she buzzed around us. Oh, my feed will look amazing with this. Instead of feeling like a bride on her wedding day, I felt like a prop in her social media showcase. What should have been our unique moment had become just another of Vivian's extravagant shows. Newlyweds should have had warm, romantic days when they returned home. Slow glances in the living room, breakfast in bed. At least that was how the works began. I was given a beautiful ring by Jack on the day we returned, one that glinted endlessly in the light. His eyes gleamed with pride as he said, "It's been in my family for generations. Take care of that ring. It's not just pricey either," Vivian added, looming over us like a black cloud on a bright day. "It's an heirloom." Her reminder made my heart sink a little because it felt more like a warning. Jack and I spent the first few weeks cooking together and stealing kisses, living in our own little world. But then Vivian started dropping by unannounced, like a storm that had settled over our home. It all started one afternoon when the doorbell rang while I was folding laundry. She had that same expression on her face, as though she were going to inspect a military installation. She said, "Just checking in on my favorite newlyweds." But her gaze flitted about the apartment as though she were looking for a problem. I tried to be polite, making small talk, even as she wandered into the kitchen, her fingers gliding over every surface. "Allie, darling, do you ever clean? And where are the fresh vegetables? A man needs his greens." Her tan dripped with disapproval. Jack just shrugged it off. Later when I told him she means well, babe. Just try to go with it. Go with it. My frustration bubbled up. Jack, she's treating me like I'm on trial in my own home. He kissed my forehead casually, as if that would solve everything. She's lonely. Ellie, let's cut her some slack. But that slack turned into something else entirely. It escalated until one day I came home late from work, riding high on the excitement of signing a major contract with a new client from Japan. That is, until I found Vivian in my living room. An uninvited storm brewing. "I heard you've been spending a lot of time at that office. Late nights." She raised an eyebrow, her voice thick with suspicion. "Yeah, it's a big project. Lots of new opportunities." I tried to explain, but she clearly had other ideas. 2 days later, she personally showed up at my office, counting the men, working with me out loud and loudly, suggesting that could be having an affair with one of them. Without invitation, she barged into my boss's office. I knew him because he was elderly and declared, "Well, she definitely won't mess with the old man." I was mortified, my face burning as red as a beetroot. I demanded she leave and apologized profusely to my boss and colleagues for the disruption. Thankfully, Mr. Jackson had a sense of humor and just laughed it off. But the damage was done. That night I lay awake wondering how we gotten here. I'd had enough. I cornered Jack in our bedroom, my voice low and tense. "Your mom crossed the line today, Jack. She's accusing me of cheating and it has to stop." He sighed deeply. Weariness etched on his face. "Please, just try to get along for me." But getting along increasingly felt like just putting up with nonsense. Things between Jack and me were getting rocky, largely due to Vivian's constant whispers in his ear. Jack had begun to nitpick everything about me, my clothing choices, my work hours. He had never minded before, but suddenly, everything was an issue. "Ellie, why do you have to wear that to work?" He frowned one morning as I got ready. I was simply wearing a blouse and skirt. "Nothing fancy, it's professional." "Jack, what's wrong with it?" I replied, adjusting my skirt. It's too much. You're just inviting comments from all those guys. His tone had a sharp edge, and I realized this was about more than just my outfit. This became a regular occurrence, but it peaked on my birthday. My boss gave me a small gift, just a book with a note that read to my practically daughter. It was an innocent, kind gesture, but Jack blew it out of proportion. You see, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Why is he giving you gifts? It's not right, Ellie. Jack was furious when he saw the book. It's just a book. He's like a father figure to me. I tried to explain, but Jack's eyes were clouded with suspicion. All thanks to Vivian's meddling. The tension at home had become unbearable, so I was relieved to head out on a business trip to a neighboring city. Our company was setting up a new factory, and I looked forward to a break from the drama. The trip went smoothly, and I was wrapping up with dinner alongside our Japanese partners when I noticed shadows lurking near the restaurant. My heart raced as I walked toward my hotel. The dimly lit street made me uneasy, and the shadows crept closer, panicked as two colleagues to walk me back. As we neared the hotel entrance, the light from the lanterns revealed who was following me, Jack and Vivian. "What the hell, Jack? What are you doing here?" I blurted out, unable to hide my shock. Vivian stepped forward, her expression twisted in anger. "We're making sure you're not up to any trouble. We can't trust you around all these men," she spat. My colleagues stared in disbelief, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. This is absurd. You're both acting like I'm some kind of criminal. But Vivian wasn't having it. "I'll be telling your parents about this. They should know what kind of woman you've turned out to be." I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Go ahead. They'll laugh you out of town." The ride back was silent. Jack and his mother sat in the front, leaving me alone in the back seat, staring out the window as city lights blurred into streaks of color. Tears filled my eyes. I was married to the man I loved. You know, I felt trapped in a nightmare with Vivian as the relentless specter that wouldn't go away when Vivian actually followed through on her threat and showed up at my parents' place. I was in disbelief. I couldn't believe it when Mom called, her voice trembling as she recounted the situation. "She's here, Ellie," my mother said, tone strained. "She demanded to see your father right away, so I gave her the address to his workshop." My heart sinking as I realized how far this had gone. I felt my stomach drop as my mom spoke. "Dad's at his workshop where he spends most of his days crafting and creating. He's truly in his element." She continued, her voice steady but laced with tension. "Your mother-in-law went there, saw your father in his work, clothes stained from the glass." She just scoffed. I gripped the foam tighter, bracing myself for what was coming next. When your father went over to greet her, he apologized for not shaking her hand. His hands were all stained from work. "You know," she looked at his hands. Ellie made a face and said something awful about coming to this backwater for nothing. My heart sank further as I listened. "She said she understands now why you turned out the way you did, and just left without another word." "Thanks for telling me, Mom. I need to think about what to do." I hung up, feeling a tumult of anger and hurt swirling inside me. It wasn't long before Vivian made her next move. The very next day, she cornered me in the living room, her eyes cold and judgmental. "Ellie, now I see where you get your manners. Or should I say lack thereof. Your father is just an ordinary worker, his hands permanently dirtied. What kind of upbringing? What kind of manners could you possibly teach any children?" I shuddered at her words. They struck me like daggers. But before I could respond, Jack walked in. Instead of defending me, he went straight to his mother, taking her in his arms. "Mom, I'm sorry about all this. Ellie's family, they're just different from us." That was it. The last straw. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Different. Is that your way of saying my family isn't good enough for your high standards? My voice broke the hurt too deep. Jack looked at me, his eyes empty. "It's just how things aren't, Ellie. We come from different worlds, so that's it." My voice rose thick with emotion. "If I'm such a disgrace, why don't we just end this? If I'm so beneath you, let's get a divorce." Vivian's eyes lit up almost gleefully. "Well, that sounds like a splendid idea." Jack just nodded passively. "Maybe that's for the best." I spent the night in our guest room, tears streaming down my face as Vivian's every word replayed in my mind, each dismissive glance from Jack, the life I thought we were building. It all felt like a lie. The early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room. As I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, it was time to make some difficult but necessary calls. For some, list was my boss, Mr. Jackson, whose kindness had always made the stresses of work bearable. "Mr. Jackson, it's Ali." I started, my voice shaky and facing some personal issues and need to take some time off. "I can take it unpaid if necessary." "Ali," he replied quickly, concern evident in his voice. "You're one of our most valuable team members. Take a paid vacation, sort things out and come back when you're ready. We'll manage here." His generosity brought a lot to my throat. "Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I can't tell you how much this means to me." Next, I dialed my mother, who had always been my anchor in any storm. As soon as she answered, I spilled everything, my words tumbling out in a torrent of emotion. "Mom, it's all falling apart here. I can't do this anymore with Jack and his mom. It's just too much." Her voice was calm and soothing. "Ali, we've been prepared for this call. Your father and I are on our way. Just pack what you need." As I ended the call, I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the few personal items I had brought into this house, none of which felt like they belonged. I started packing each item, a reminder of the life I thought I'd built with Jack. Vivian appeared at the doorway, her presence like a dark cloud. "Remember, Ali, only take what you bought with your own money. Don't think about grabbing anything else," she said, her voice cold and accusatory. It wasn't long before I heard the gravel crunch under the tires of an old vehicle. Looking out the window, I saw the familiar beat-up pickup truck that belonged to my parents. Jack and Vivian followed me outside, their expressions a mixture of smugness and curiosity as my parents' truck pulled up. Jack scoffed loudly. "Sure, that old thing will even make it back." My father sucked out a quiet strength emanating from him as he faced Jack without a word. He handed over the divorce papers, his eyes steady and unwavering. Jack grabbed the papers and signed them with a smirk, his mother chuckling beside him, glad to be rid of this mess. We arrived at my parents' home, a large, imposing structure that felt more like a sanctuary now. I spent the next few hours unpacking and trying to settle my nerves. The peace of the familiar surroundings slowly calmed me that evening as I sat looking out at the garden. My phone rang. It was Vivian. "Ellie, you need to return the ring. It's a family heirloom, not a parting present." I pulled the phone away for a while, taking a deep breath before replying. "Vivian, the ring was given to me as a wedding present. If you want it, come and grab it yourself." The morning light was just beginning to spread over the horizon when I observed Jack and his mother, Vivian, from the upstairs window. They paused at the gate, peering up at the mansion as if they had strayed into a fairy tale. Their faces of incredulity were nearly funny. A grin formed over my lips as I observed them from behind the curtain. They seemed so out of place against the backdrop of my vast, neatly maintained front yard, the bewilderment obvious. I moved away from the window, hearing my folks downstairs, and joined them. We shared a knowing gaze before heading outdoors. Calm and composed, my parents strolled by Jack and Vivian without a word. Heading straight toward the garage, they pretended not to see the perplexed expressions from my weird husband and his mother. As the garage door flew open, showing 3 sleek, high-end vehicles, I could hear Jack's sudden intake of breath. My father picked a shiny black automobile, and we all piled aboard. Right before we pulled out of the driveway, at last, Jack was able to speak. "What's all this, Ellie? This residence? These vehicles?" I got out of the car and walked toward them with a sense of peace that hadn't been there for months. "Jack, this is my family's house. My father has many business properties in addition to a glass factory. I was born and raised here." Vivian's expression twisted in bewilderment. "However, your dad. He was dressed for work. He had filthy hands." The sight of her navy made me grin. "Indeed, Vivian." He was introducing a new range of goods. His firm has a record of becoming involved, interactive. It doesn't imply that he isn't prosperous or successful. They were left speechless, unable to make sense of the contrast between the lavish surroundings and the picture of the industrious guy they had witnessed. A bunch of neighbors came over at that very time, their faces beaming. "Salutations, Mr. Thompson. We learned about your most recent charity function. What you're doing is amazing. Additionally, we will help you in the mayoral elections." One of them joyfully cried out, while Jack's face contorted with a mixture of guilt in his eyes, flitting between his mother and me. My parents nodded and thanked them. With the unquestionable reality in front of her washing away her previous haughtiness, Vivian appeared as if she had swallowed something sour. I gave Jack and Vivian a final glance before turning back to the car. "You view things a little differently now, I suppose." "Not unkindly," I said. Their shocked and realizing looks attested to the fact that I was finally free of the past, with all of its struggles and heartbreaks. But Jack moved before I could enjoy the moment. He pushed his mother out of the way so hard she stumbled. "You know it's all your fault. Your stupidity pushes her away." He turned to me and yelled at her, his words laced with resentment. His attitude changed entirely. His hands reached out as though he could wipe everything away with a single touch as he hurried over and attempted to draw me into an embrace. "Listen to me, Ellie. Please. Didn't we get along well together? I cherish you." "I do." His voice was a frantic whisper as he begged. "His touch makes me flinch. His dishonesty has long since smothered the warmth we once had." "Jack, stop. Simply stop." I responded forcefully, using all of my effort to push him away. I climbed into the car quickly. Without a word, my heart was racing. The garage doors start to close behind us as soon as my father presses the remote button. With a mixture of desperation and incredulity, Jack and Vivian stood there shouting their voices. "Forgive us, Ellie." With a cracking voice, Jack screamed, "We didn't mean any of it." Vivian joined in, fighting for the honor she had lost. "I was mistaken, sweet Ellie. Please." I was troubled by the moment's finality as we drove away. But I had a need for closure, a final closure to this phase of my life. I thought this was my father's turn, so I requested him to stop the car when we got to the end of the driveway. Jack rushed toward us, his face beaming with optimism, while his mother followed silently, her former grace giving way to desperation. I removed my wedding ring, held it out, and rolled down the window. When Jack realized what was going to happen, his eyes widened. "Jack, this is the end of it." My voice was steady as I spoke. I tossed the ring out the window after saying that. Before settling on the plush grass along the road, it sparkled momentarily in the early morning light. With her hand fumbling through the grass, Vivian, ever the opportunist, hurried to where the ring had landed. The agonizing past, her role that, and the window closing despite their entreaties. They stood for, "Dad, let's go." Silently, I said. I returned to the city 2 weeks later and found a new flat that felt more like home than I had in a long time. When I went back to work, Mr. Jackson greeted me with open arms and a kind comprehension that helped me settle back into my routine. Jack tried to get in touch with me many times, each time becoming more frantic. He stated that he had severed his relationship with his mother, pleading for another shot at things that are irreparable once they are destroyed. I banned his number and informed him that this time it was permanent. There was no need for more words.